Hey, squad. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Suzette Speaks, and you're watching Let's Talk Justice, a talk show for the community. As many of you know, we have been doing a series this month where we're interviewing all the candidates for Florida's Congressional District 20. I almost couldn't get it out. Florida Congressional District 20 covers parts of Broward County and Palm Beach County. And today I have a very special gentleman who literally just came off of giving a speech at a Haitian in support of Haitian migrants. And he literally just sat down and I'm like, thank you for making time. He is super busy. He joins us from Palm Beach County, where he has served as a Florida House of Representative. Thank you. And he also is now stepping out there to go to DC. So I'm very thankful that he made time for us here on Let's Talk Justice. Y'all give a warm South Florida welcome to none other than Representative Omari Hardy. Welcome, Mr. Hardy. How are you? Good morning, everyone. Please let us know where you're watching from. And thank you. There he is. Hey. Appreciate you. The people are on. They're saying good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Whether you're watching on the Jamaicans.com Facebook page, our co-host, Let's Talk Justice page, or Suzette Speaks YouTube, we welcome all of you. This guy is so dynamic. I don't know how we're going to cover everything, but we're going to try. And I want him to, first talk about his personal story. So tell us how you grew up, Mr. Hardy. Welcome. And thank you for being here.
Look, thank you for making time for me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'm excited. Like I said, you just came from where? Let the people know that you're in these streets. Where did you just come from?
So we just came from the courthouse in West Palm Beach, where we gathered to rally in support of Haitian people who are trying to come to this country and seek a better life for themselves, just as everyone who came to this country, not in chains as most people of color did. Everybody came here seeking exactly what Haitians at the border are seeking, a better life for themselves. And so that's where I just came from, standing in solidarity with our community here with the Haitian diaspora.
That's awesome. And I know you were a speaker. You're like watching the time. We're watching the time. And this is how these things go. When you're on, the campaign trail, you never get a dull moment. So thank you for both standing up for our Haitian brothers and sisters and for being here. So I'm glad to hear that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about U.S. Haiti policy and what that means if you are elected to go to DC. So I'm just going to turn over the floor to you. Welcome. Everybody's here. Valda says, true. Yeah, true. We gotta stand up. Remember, this is a country based on, bringing immigrants. This is a country that immigrants built, I should say. So we've got to remember that at every corner, every turn. So, all right, let's get into who you are. Just tell us more about yourself. I know you are a born Floridian, which is very rare. People come here from all over. So you grew up in South Florida. Tell us more about yourself, sir, and welcome again.
Right. So, look, I was born and raised in the 33311 in Lauderdale Manors in Fort Lauderdale. Both my parents were educators. And so, I grew up kind of, going to school with my parents and walking to whatever school was next door. When my mom was teaching at Dillard High, I went to Dillard Elementary and so on and so forth. I went to the University of Miami originally on a music scholarship. Once I was there, I was like, maybe I should get a degree in something more practical. So I graduated with a degree in economics, moved up to Palm Beach County and followed my parents' footsteps and started teaching civics at Roosevelt Community Middle School, in inner city West Palm Beach. And, when I moved to Palm Beach County, I moved to a little town called Lake Worth, which is about an 8-minute drive away from Mar-a-Lago. So you'd think that maybe, it's a town that has some resources that are doing, good things for people, but the opposite was true. The town has a 28% poverty rate in a good economy. It's the second poorest town in Palm Beach County. And also it's a town where a majority of the residents, actually over 65% of the residents, are people of color, but they didn't have anybody of color sitting on the city commission. They didn't have anybody on the city commission who worked a job. And I think we see this a lot of times with politicians, a lot of business owners, a lot of landlords, property owners, and so forth. But we don't have a lot of people who earn wages for a living. And so that led me to run because I felt that people of color and working class folks were being neglected by, their local government there. And I won. And, ever since, I've just been doing my best to represent the underrepresented at the local level and in the Florida House of Representatives as well. And that's what really feeds my passion for public service.
I love it. So you've been quite a busy man. You're a young man. You're in your early 30s. I'm all in your business.
I'm
I want to.
31. Yeah.
I'm just like, you've accomplished so much in such a short period of time. I just want to let the people know where we're talking about, because the special election, we're doing this series because we want people to get out and vote. But
Right.
the special election here in South Florida is November 2nd. So if you live in large parts of Palm Beach County or Broward County, I just want to tell the people about where we're referencing. The Florida 20th Congressional District has about 713,000 people. That's huge, that you would represent if elected. 48% male, 51% female. Think about that. The racial breakdown of this district is 52% African American or Black, 40% white, 1.8% Asian, and 0.4% Native American, 20% Hispanic. Right. Unemployment in this district is 17.1%. Median household income, 35,000 about. High school graduation rate is pretty high, 78%. College graduation rate is about 17%. So we got to first recognize where we're speaking of and some of the demographics that you would be representing. So I think you've spent a lot of time in politics at a very early age. Tell us about your experience first going to the Florida legislature. You were elected, or you were appointed first? Correct me if I'm wrong.
I was elected.
You were elected?
I was elected. Look, I have a habit of running in races that everybody says I shouldn't run in. When I got to Lake Worth, there was a guy in the seat. He had been in there for 3 terms, but I didn't feel he was doing a good job, and I ran, and I beat him by 18 votes. And the same thing in the Florida House. I mean, we had a community. My district is a district a lot like this. It's mostly people of color and working class folks. And we had a guy who was in there. Sure, he had a D next to his name for Democrat, but he was voting with Republicans on how to fund our public schools, defunding public schools. He was voting with Republicans on reproductive rights. He was voting with Republicans on giving tax cuts to large corporations. And I ran against him. And, fortunately, we were able to win and bring real, authentic representation to that seat. And the experience of serving in the Florida House, I just want to say, look, I taught civics. And so I came into office with a very academic kind of book.
You were a civics teacher. You were teaching young people this, so I can see you're passionate about it. Yes.
And look, the fundamentals of what we teach kids about how government works is true. But what serving in office has taught me is that the average person has an understanding of politics as in this country, at least, as primarily a conflict that plays out between an upper class of people who are wealthy and who are politically well connected, and an underclass of people who tend to be people of color, tend to be working class, and tend not to have the connections that some other folks have. And that is honestly a very true representation of how politics plays out. It's a situation where there's conflict between those who have a lot and want even more, and those who don't have a lot and whose needs are not being met by our government. And, that was true, I found, at the local level. That's also true at the state level. And, the very interesting thing is that because Republicans control state government, there are a lot of Democrats in Tallahassee who feel that they can be effective only if they cozy up to the Republicans, if they pull their punches on incredibly important things that the Republicans are doing and kind of let them get away with some things in exchange for some legislative trinkets, a few $100,000 in an appropriation project, a minor bill that you might pass. And that, I feel, is an approach that does not serve working class people well. We need folks who are going to go up there and stand up for their communities rather than lying down for their communities, right? We need someone who's going to speak authentically to the fact that we have working class folks whose needs aren't being met and who are being ignored by their government. And so that was a very interesting and frustrating experience in the House, but it was educational for me, honestly.
Yeah, I thank you for kind of summarizing what the state of affairs in Tallahassee really is. So I'm going to break it down a little bit further for those watching. Again, welcome. This is Let's Talk Justice. Let me do a quick reset. I'm Suzette Speaks, TV host and attorney from out of South Florida. And I'm happy to be interviewing all of the candidates, or most, I should say, of the candidates who are running for a special election that will be held in South Florida, Broward County in particular, and Palm Beach County, November 2nd. We will be electing someone to replace the late Alcee Hastings to send to Washington, D.C. So if you are in, I think I can't list all the cities, but there are so many cities, check and make sure you are ready. Go ahead, Mr. Hardy.
Well, look, I'd like to say this. You mentioned that about 52% of the people in this district are African American and Black, and about 20% of the district is Hispanic. So, that's 5% people of color. So when folks say, am I in the district? I like to say, do you live in a place where other people of color are also around you? If so, chances are you're in the district.
Absolutely. So yes, that's a great point. 70% of your district are people of color. So most likely, if you're in a city where there are a lot of folks, a diverse group of people, you're most likely going to be voting on November 2nd. So there are 17 people in this race. I still can't believe it. I thought to myself, wow. I guess because there's a very few seats where an incumbent is not there, where someone who held the seat is no longer, with us. So why now, sir? You were a rock star in Tallahassee. Why now? Why this seat? Why did you decide to throw your hat in this race?
Well, I grew up in this district. I represent a portion of this district now in the Florida House. And I feel that after we've been represented so well and so faithfully by Representative Alcee Hastings, that we should elect someone who is going to build on his legacy as a fighter, as someone who spoke truth to power in defense of poor and working class families and people of color and other marginalized communities. And when I looked at the options that I had, lots of wonderful folks in the race, but I really do believe that we should be looking forward and trying to build on that legacy. And that's why I'm running. We are at a seminal moment in this country's history. We have a Republican Party that has lost its mind. We have a former Republican president that fomented and supported an insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th, who's going to run again. And we have Republicans attacking our voting rights, even our right to protest, women's reproductive rights, first in Texas and now in this state. The anti-abortion bill was filed just this past week. This is a time for us to elect Democrats into Congress who are going to fight back because the consequences of losing, in particular for people of color and poor and working class folks, the consequences are just too high.
There's so many parts of what you just said I want to break down a little bit. I'm sorry, because sometimes our StreamYard will get a little choppy. Excuse me if I freeze a little, but I'm still here. Again, welcome. If you're watching and you have a question for Representative Omari Hardy, he's out of Palm Beach. He'll be running in a special election November 2nd. Please drop a comment. Let us know, because he's here to answer to you, the people. So we're proud of him. He's done so much already. Clearly a man with a lot of civics knowledge. So we're going to try to break that down a little bit and use this as an educational moment, as well as to understand where he stands on policy issues. So I'm going to back up a little bit. In Tallahassee, were there any major bills or were you a part of, I don't know, but people who are watching may not know. Tell us about your most, what accomplishments you're most proud of from your time as a state legislator.
Yeah, so look, we were able to get things done. I reached across the aisle with Representative Duggan, who's a Republican, but we really feel that local governments should have more control over the ability to plan for their communities. And so we worked together on a bill, HB 487, growth management, and it gave more power and authority to our local governments. It's this concept called home rule. And so we worked together. We passed that bill. It was bipartisan, passed with overwhelming support in both the House and the Senate. It was signed by the governor. In addition to that, I also brought home money to the district. Riviera Beach is a big part of this district, and I was able to secure $1 million for the public safety complex there. And if you look at other freshman Democrats in the Florida House, no other freshman Democrat had a single appropriation that was in that seven figures the way that my appropriation with Riviera Beach was. So we were able to get things done. But the context in which we were able to achieve those things, I think is really important. There are a lot of Democrats who go up there and who, they don't want to upset the Republicans because the Republicans run Tallahassee. So they, quietly, sit on the floor of the, they quietly sit on the floor of the House. They don't push back against the Republicans who are trying to take away our voting rights and so on. And that's how they're able to bring things home. I was very vocal. I was a very vocal critic of Governor DeSantis and, what I call vaccine apartheid, the fact that there were white communities that were being lavished with vaccines and, Black communities really had to struggle and put up a fight and make a ruckus to get vaccines in our community. I pushed back very strongly against what they were doing with House Bill One, the anti-protest bill. I pushed back very strongly on the voter suppression bill. We were able to get some of the worst aspects of that bill taken out of it, even though it's still bad. So we were able to get things done, passing a bill, bringing money home to the district, but we didn't pull our punches with the Republicans. We brought the fight every single day, and I think that should be a model for others who want to go and serve their community in an authentic way.
I think that's amazing, because there's a lot of ground you covered there. So we're going to break this down a little bit. Welcome. Let us know where you're watching from. I see so many people in the chat. Thank you so much. Please hit that like button and please hit that share button so more people will know about Representative Omari Hardy running for Florida Congressional District 20. And again, Florida is a swing state. And right now, this district does not have representation for over several months. So what the 700,000 plus people need is, someone who will hopefully identify and really understand, what the needs are, and then hopefully take those needs to DC. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what you talked about just now, what you mentioned, the vaccine rollout in Florida. So for those of you watching who may not know, this was a huge story. Our governor in Florida, Ron DeSantis, when he first, let's roll back to 2020, came out with, the vaccine comes along. I think it was fall, early spring. Yeah,
it was December 2020 and going into,
So when he first put out the vaccine, we noticed in Florida, there were only certain communities that were getting the vaccine first. And they happened to be highly affluent, majority Republican districts and areas of the state. And yes, that, was for 65 and older. It was for older Americans, older Floridians. And so that was one of the excuses that came forward, and one of the reasons or the justifications for how it was rolled out and to whom it was rolled out. But in the news, I think a lot of the media picked up on, wait a minute, communities of color are not really being included in the rollout. And you, sir, made a big deal out of this, particularly where you, and even outside of the district you represent, just in your surrounding areas, a lot of the areas around Lake Okeechobee are heavily agricultural areas. A lot of folks work the land there, and they were being left out, and vaccine rollouts in that area were 2 and 3 bus rides away for people who needed it the most. So talk a little bit about your involvement and speaking up against what our governor had proposed in terms of his vaccine rollout early on in the COVID crisis.
Right. Well, I think you summarized it very well. When he rolled out the vaccine, first of all, he deviated from the original CDC guidance, which is to make the vaccine accessible to those who were at the greatest risk, not just of being hospitalized with COVID-19 and potentially dying from it, but also who were at great risk of getting it. And by the way, that's working class people. While a lot of us were working from home, there were people who we called essential workers, folks who are working at the grocery store, folks who work in the healthcare field and so on, but folks who are taking care of all of these things that we need every day to continue to live a civilized life. And they were going to work while we were working from home. So the first thing that he did was he restricted access to the vaccine for senior citizens, which was contrary to what the CDC was suggesting at the time. But more importantly than that, he tended to focus on rolling out the vaccines in communities that were not populated largely by people of color. And I had an issue with that, and other folks in my community had an issue with that. And we reached out to the governor's office asking for vaccines, and we worked to get about 500 vaccines in the Black community in West Palm Beach, but that's not enough. You can't just throw us a few hundred vaccines and think that you've solved an issue that is much more systemic than whether or not you've delivered 500 vaccines somewhere. And when you talk about the area around Lake Okeechobee and the Glades, we're talking about Belle Glade, South Bay, and Pahokee. When he did that vaccine rollout where it was Publix only at first, the Glades doesn't have a Publix like many communities of color. And if you were in the Glades, to find a Publix, you had to drive 27 miles. And if you didn't have a car, you had to take 2 buses just to get to a Publix. And those folks were really suffering from the pandemic because you got a lot of farm workers out there. You got a lot of elderly folk out there. You got a lot of people living doubled up with multiple families in the same units together. And so they were just systematically excluded, and that was wrong. And we made a fuss about it, and we kept making a fuss about it until the governor responded.
Yeah, I think, again, that was something that had such an impact, particularly for me watching down a little bit down the road. I was like, wow, this really excluded such a marginalized community. And I'm not going to say it was intentional, but it doesn't matter if the effect is that it excludes a large portion of our population. So
The
I'm glad
thing,
that you spoke up on that. Yes, sir.
look, the thing about racism is that it doesn't have to be intentional. It when you have systems in place that don't take people of color and poor and working class folks of all color into account, you're systematically excluding people. And that's what the governor did. And so in his mind, what he did wasn't racist because, in his mind, I guess he was not overtly trying to exclude Black people, but the effect of his policies were exclusionary. And that's all that mattered.
Yeah, the outcomes are what we looked at. So I'm glad that you did speak up. I want to ask you from office holding position. Is there more that you could do from this seat if you're elected to dispel some of the myths that are going on about the COVID-19 vaccine among communities of color? And how will you help ensure that the access across the board, stays high and that folks who want the vaccine can get the vaccine?
Well, I appreciate you for asking that. So I'm working right now with pastors in the Palm Beach County area to shift our focus on vaccine equity from one of simply access to one of information. And I think the faith community is a great way to do this. The Bible says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And that's what's happening right now with COVID-19 because of the misinformation that is being spread on social media. And so we need to get together and have real and uncomfortable conversations with our friends and with our relatives, because our people are dying. It's not just seniors now, it's working class people. And we need to make sure that we are protected. And of course, as a member of Congress, being able to serve more people, having more resources, that gives you an even better opportunity to get the message out to folks and to engage the community about why we need to be taking this vaccine to save our own lives.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, did you serve on specific committees in Tallahassee?
Yes.
Which committees did you serve on, may I ask?
Yes. So I served on state affairs.
Mm-hmm.
I served on insurance and banking,
Mm-hmm.
which is I was lucky to get on that committee. A lot of freshmen don't get on it. And I also served on the agriculture, water, and environment committees. There's a policy committee and there's a money or appropriations committee for that. And I served on both of those. So I was able to learn a lot about policy matters with respect to the state of Florida. And in particular on insurance and banking, I had an opportunity to advocate for folks. The insurance lobby is strong, it's well funded, and they want to make it very difficult for homeowners who are being basically dealt with unfairly by their insurance companies. They want to make it very difficult for homeowners and property owners to fight back against the insurance companies. They're rigging the laws to make it very difficult for homeowners to dispute when insurance companies don't pay claims. And that's wrong. And, having an opportunity to be a voice for folks who are going up against this very powerful industry was a privilege for me because my family has dealt with that.
Absolutely. Especially here in Florida, we need our homeowners insurance. We have hurricanes and other natural disasters. Like, come on, that's why we pay everyone. It's to make sure when we need you, you're there. So I'm glad that you were, fighting for those who want to make sure, they just get what's fair. That's basically what it boils down to. Hello, we've been paying for years. So interesting. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
No, look, insurance companies, they love to be in the insurance business when it's time to collect a premium. But like most businesses, you have revenue and you have expenses, and their expenses are paying out on claims when something happens to your home. And that's when you can't find them, but that's when it's very difficult for them to engage. And so trying to keep them honest is what being on that committee is about.
Interesting. So let me ask you, if you were elected and go to DC, are there any committees that you think you would, have a promising start on, or would you prefer to be on?
So the first committee I would like to be on is rules. Look, I'm a huge fan of knowing the rules. When you serve on a government body, you have to know the rules. You can't get anything done if you don't know the rules. But the interesting thing about the rules committee is that they decide basically how bills get to proceed. If you don't have folks on the rules committee who are in support of your bill isn't going to even get to the point where it can be voted on. And also, when you're on the Rules Committee, you can tell folks that things that are in their bill really should not be in there based on the rules that the House has. And so it gives you an opportunity to affect everything, every single
Gatekeeper.
bill.
I like it.
Exactly. And so
no, this does not follow the rules. I
exactly.
like it.
Exactly.
Interesting. So I'm gonna
That's
pick
number
your
one.
brain. Go ahead,
Yeah.
sir.
No, so rules and foreign affairs, I
Mm.
think is very important. We're talking about what's happening with Haiti. There are other issues all over the world. Where we're serving on foreign affairs would give me an opportunity to advocate for American foreign policy that is centered on human rights and on the needs of poor and oppressed people all over the world. Because look, at the end of the day, Martin Luther King said, "We're all tied together by a single garment of destiny." When folks in Haiti are dealing with a dysfunctional government that has been messed with and systematically undermined by France, even by the United States, and by other countries, being on foreign affairs gives you an opportunity to potentially correct for some of these historic wrongs in the way that we've treated countries around the world. And that's why we're having a border crisis, not just with respect to Haitian Americans, but with Guatemalan Mayan Americans, Mexican Americans, and so on, because of how we have treated other countries and not given them an opportunity to do what's best for their citizens. And so I think foreign affairs is important.
That is a huge committee, and if you get lucky enough to get elected and on that committee, sir, there's a lot of change that you can affect. So let me ask you this. I'm gonna back up a little bit. We're gonna come back to Haiti. Mm-hmm. Are you a teacher now?
So when I went to the legislature, I left the classroom because you can't do both.
Oh, okay. And tell us, when you were an educator, what were you teaching?
Civics. And I taught a little world history and I taught a little American history. So primarily 7th grade, which I love because the kids are old enough to where you can talk with them, but they're young enough for my dad jokes to be funny. So
they got some sense, but they're still moldable. I love
exactly.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So I'm going to ask you to put on that hat for a little bit. So when people, and I just backing up a little bit because I want to thank everybody for watching. Drop us a comment if you have any questions for State Representative Omari Hardy running for Florida Congressional District 20. The special election is going to be on November 2nd. I want to ask you, because I assume everybody might know what committees do within a legislative body. And I just want you to give me a quick summary for those who are watching who are like, okay, she asked about committees, so what does that mean? Right. What is the function of a committee to the body at large, and why is it important to serve on them?
Great question. So members of Congress write bills that they hope will become laws, right? So for a bill to become a law, it's got to pass Congress, get to the president's desk, and he's got to sign it, okay? But very rarely does someone just write a bill and then the whole Congress votes on it. When you write a bill, they send it to different committees based on the topic of that bill. And the committees read and study the bill. They can make changes to the bill. They can outright reject the bill. But it is in the committees that the work of passing laws is really, really done. Unless it's an emergency bill, something like the COVID-19 CARES Act from last year, every bill is going through a committee unless it's a major emergency like that.
Yeah, thank you for breaking that down. So again, those watching, thank you so much for joining us. This is Suzette Speaks here on Let's Talk Justice, where we talk about everyday law and politics for everyday people. So I want to pivot back to Haiti now. Funny enough, I was thank you, Valdo. Valdo's like, good luck. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I was just reading, speaking of Haiti, that the United States had actually occupied with military forces Haitian on Haitian soil under, I think it was President Woodrow Wilson, 1915 to 1934, basically occupied Haiti and tried to control their resources in order to funnel it through to the World Bank, through the U.S. banks to pay France for losing when Haitian revolutionaries, 1804, shout out to my Haitians watching, were the first free Black republic who kicked out the European colonizers and said, no, we want to be free. In an agreement thereafter, they had to settle with the government of France to say, don't invade us, we'll pay you. And most of the Haitian wealth of their GDP was sent to France vis-a-vis U.S. banks for over 100 years. They just finished paying off France in 1947. This is some interesting history that they don't necessarily teach, depending on where you go to school. So what are your thoughts when it
critical
comes
race
to
theory? No.
Yeah, hello, somebody. And what are your thoughts?
How about the truth?
Yeah, exactly. Imagine this. We're running from the truth.
Right.
So thank you. Sakpase says, appreciate this live. There's some good info. Listen, I was just reading about it because I was listening to an NPR interview with Edwidge Dandikat, who was talking about American occupation of Haiti. And I was like, American troops were on the ground in Haiti, assassinating leaders and all this stuff because they said they had to keep control based on what they called infighting between certain powers. But every country has fought, most countries have fought, civil wars.
Including ours.
So, okay, you're mad about it, but you want to make sure the money still flows. But okay.
Right.
So to now, we saw these horrific images on the border of Del Rio, Texas, and Acuña, Mexico, Ciudad Acuña. And it was just so reminiscent of so much terrorism that has taken place here on American soil and on Haitian soil by American soldiers in this past century. And I thought about it and I was like, whoa, what are we doing here? Biden administration. And since that time, they said they've cleared out, they cleared it out quick. Everybody got sent back to Mexico, processed, or in my opinion, unfortunately sent back to Haiti. So tell me your thoughts seeing those photos. Tell me your thoughts on TPS. Tell me your thoughts on temporary protective status of Haitians who are living in the United States, who are not citizens here, who are Haitian nationals, who came after the first earthquake. We've had a second earthquake. We've had an assassination of a president. If this is not political unrest, I don't know what is. So tell me about, I wanted to just kind of couch the conversation for those who may not know the background. So tell me about what you thought when you saw those pictures, what you think you would do if you were elected to Congress, and where you stand on TPS and DACA.
Yeah, well, look, unfortunately, what we saw at the border, there's a long tradition of that in this country, of treating people of color inhumanely. And so it hurt my heart. But as someone who knows a little bit about the history of this country, I was not completely surprised that people of color seeking to gain entry to this country to better their lives would be treated with violence and inhumanity. That said, it obviously needs to stop. With respect to TPS, we need to take the T off of TPS and give folks here permanent legal residency and a pathway to citizenship. With respect to the long history of Western colonial powers treating Haiti unfairly, it seems crazy. Black Haitians were the victims of the global slave trade, in particular of the transatlantic slave trade. And rather than getting reparations, they had to pay reparations to their owners. And in addition to that, as they're having to make this payment just to guarantee that France would not reinvade them, other countries would refuse, including America, would refuse to do trade with Haiti. So they couldn't sell their goods the way that other countries who had valuable goods to sell were able to engage in that kind of trade. We blocked them from engaging in that kind of trade. We refused to trade with them. We treated them like they were less than. So of course, after 100 plus years of that, there are going to be problems because you have systematically sabotaged and undermined this fledgling Republican democracy in the Northern Hemisphere. But in addition to that, we did occupy Haiti. And what that did to the culture is very interesting because, Republicans preach about personal responsibility. Well, when you go and militarily invade another country, you are preventing them from flexing their democracy muscle. And that muscle atrophied because we were there occupying them with military force. And we refinanced that debt, which basically made us basically be the country through which all those payments were run well into, as you said, 1947, in the middle of the 20th century, when we should have had some inkling that this was wrong, dead wrong, and that it shouldn't have continued. But that's what's happened. Now, I think we have a broader problem with our immigration system. It is a complicated immigration system. It's too costly for people to get their papers in order to come to this country the right way. And we don't have enough slots, so to speak. We don't have enough visas. We don't have enough opportunities for people from other countries seeking a better life to come here. And that's what I think we really need to address. We need to have a welcoming policy with respect to immigration. We do not. We have engineered the immigration system to favor white people from European countries who have money and degrees and who we think are going to come here and be quote unquote productive. I don't know anybody who works harder than the immigrants in our community. I don't know anybody who believes more in the American dream than folks who are coming here from countries where the American dream is just a dream, not even a dream, right?
And
yeah, and so look, immigration is not a threat to this country; it's a boon to this country. And I think we need to realize that. And if we do that, I think it will be better for everybody because the economic case for it is so strong. You have people here who are going to be working, who are going to be creating jobs. We say that we can't find workers. Well, gosh, that means that we should allow more immigration in the country.
Imagine. There's so much that you've said there, and I'm going to try not to editorialize. This is your interview, but I agree with a lot of what you said because I think that particularly, the immigration slots, I think they said the Biden administration is going to open it up to more than 100,000 refugees. But if you think about all of the 125,000 refugees for the whole entire world,
that's not enough.
We just had the Afghan crisis. We have the Haitian crisis. We have a lot of people that are suffering where they live. No food, no water, no education, no jobs. Right. So if we are, who we say we are as Americans, we got to really think about that number and possibly, in my opinion, increase it.
Right.
Yeah, and I think also in the interview I heard on NPR with Ndouich Dandikat, which is a world-renowned Haitian author, she was just saying, can Haitians make decisions for themselves for the first time? What about asking Haitians what they want? And how about involving Haitians? As you described, the history with outsiders, particularly our government and others, is to make decisions for and to not involve those who are in and from that place. You could say Haiti, you could say wherever, because we've had a long history in Central and South America and the Caribbean. Yes. So it's very interesting that, we don't get taught. The only thing I was taught is Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And no one ever teaches you why.
Right.
And once you know the facts, you're like, oh, wait, it was pillaged for 100 plus years. So it's a very interesting story. And I thank you, Jackie.
Poverty doesn't create itself.
No, it didn't just come out of nowhere. Like, come on, y'all.
Look at some of the most impoverished countries in the world, and you will see a common theme. It is called Western imperialism. Whether that is in Africa, where countries that have had their strongest and youngest folks drained from their country via the slave trade, and then were colonized by European powers and kept down and kept subjugated. Whether that is countries in Southeast Asia that are now just emerging as growing countries because we screwed around in their democracies in the middle of the 20th century, you will see a common theme of Western imperialism, and that's something that we have to correct and atone for. We don't seem to want to recognize or acknowledge the role that Western largely white democracies, so-called democracies, have played in sabotaging other countries that were doing just fine before we got involved.
And I'm going to stop you there. We're going to go to the next topic. I see Jackie Solgener says, thanks for keeping us informed. Blessing and good luck. Thank you. Art wants to go a bit deeper. We're going to leave Haiti in just a moment, but he says, I agree with most of what he said, but we're not addressing the internal conflicts that are keeping Haitians in the situation we're currently in. There's way more to it. We know, obviously, there's all these situations in terms of political infighting and other things on the ground. So we're going to leave it there, but I want to get to, you want to extend TPS or not make it temporary? And what about the DACA individuals who have qualified as deferred action? What is it? Childhood arrivals, the people who came with their parents. Their parents came in illegally, but they were less than 18 years of age and they are, American, or they've been in America for their whole life. What do you think about DACA and those recipients?
Let me just say this. If you are in the country and you do not have permanent legal residency and you are not, involved in organized crime or something like that, then you need to be given a green card and a path to citizenship. That is extremely important. And in addition to that, we need to make it easier for people to immigrate to the country. You shouldn't have to hire an attorney to. How did many Italian Americans or Irish Americans or German Americans come to this country? They got on a boat. they declared themselves at some port of entry like Ellis Island in New York City, and we gave them entry to this country. It's not that complicated.
Exactly. I think it's so slow as well. People waiting 10, 15 years to become citizens. I mean, as you've just mentioned, I mean, our Irish brothers, our Italian brothers, when there was the potato famine, when they were also hungry and tired and in political, dysfunction, we welcomed them.
Yes,
so we maybe it's 2 or 3 generations before where we are now, but
Look,
we had the same policy towards our European brothers and sisters.
It was about racism. We allowed millions of European immigrants to come to this country, and it was not the first major immigration bill we got was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I believe was 1882. I could be wrong about the year, but it was.
Where we going there? We going. This is the history lesson. I love it.
But that was the first major piece of immigration legislation that we had. Why? Because Chinese immigrants were attempting to come to this country the same way Irish and Italian Americans and others from Europe were coming. And now all of a sudden, when those immigrants weren't white, that was when we decided to tighten up immigration in this country. And our immigration system today is based on that legacy. So our entire immigration system is racist.
It is a deep conversation. I love this. Queen of the South says, my uncle has been here since the 80s and he just got his citizenship last year. That is not uncommon, funny enough. And she also adds, hey, Suzette and guests, just coming by and I like it. You are bringing good 411. Well, we hope to educate and inform and also to hopefully encourage all of you. If you're thinking about running for office, if you're thinking about getting more involved, he is a wonderful example of stepping out there and putting, the people first. So I'm going to switch topics now. We've talked a little bit about foreign policy. If you get on the Foreign Relations Committee, I'm sure you're going to be dynamite. What are some of the other, first I want to talk about education as an educator yourself.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of changes coming down from the governor in terms of, let's talk about both mask mandates. And then let's also talk about removal of statewide high stakes testing. So there were 2 announcements in the last month that were made. First and foremost, the governor does not want to require anyone to have to wear a mask at school. He wants, parents to be able to opt out. We've had a couple of school boards step in. One in your district, Broward County, Dr. Rosalind Osgood and the entire school board, her as the chair, they were like, nope, you can take my salary, which he has threatened to, and I think he has withheld funding. And I think Alachua, if I am not mistaken, has also said, no, we are going to mandate masks because we think it is a public safety and school safety issue and not a political one. Let us first start there. What do you think about the governor's actions and should masks be mandated for students in K through 12? And we'll get to the second half, which is about him changing the FCAT and those type of changes. First of all, masks. Where are you on mandating masks for students?
Well, the governor's playing politics with people's lives here, which is what he has done throughout the pandemic. It's very obvious that students should be wearing masks in school. First, because they do not even have the opportunity, many of them, to get vaccinated because the vaccines have not been approved for children under the age of 16. So they are vulnerable. And those of us who hold public office have taken an oath to serve and protect the people of Florida. And I think that oath should imply that we have an obligation to protect vulnerable children and not to use them and the politicization of COVID-19 policies to pander to crazy folks. It's the same folks. There's so much overlap between the anti-mask people, the anti-vax people, and the people who are showing up at school board meetings talking about critical race theory. It's the same people, and the governor is playing politics with people's lives by pandering to those folks and punishing school districts that are actually doing their job and protecting vulnerable children. So I support mask mandates in school. With respect to the FCAT, look, I was in the 3rd grade when Jeb Bush was elected, and that brought the FCAT into the state of Florida. That high stakes testing ruined education, public education. And the fact that, we went from the FCAT to the FSA didn't change much. And what the governor's proposal is, he's talking about getting rid of the FSA, but he's really talking about replacing it with similarly high stakes tests on a more year-round basis, right? So he's taking away the one
It's the
big.
same thing.
It's the same thing. Just stop it with the standard. It doesn't matter if it's one big test at the end of the year or three big tests
right.
throughout the year. The problem is we have Republicans who control the state who don't trust educators, who don't trust parents, teachers, and the educators who are trained and experienced in delivering knowledge and information to our children, and they want to micromanage the process for our public schools. And first of all, that's not even a Republican idea, because I thought that Republicans believe in local control of things, right? I thought that
until it doesn't suit them.
Until it doesn't suit them. Until it doesn't suit them. Right.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. Do you agree with what President Biden did by mandating that companies over a certain amount of workers, over 100 workers, now either mandate the vaccine or have regular testing? Are you in favor of that? Do you think he made a good decision with implementing that?
I think he made a good decision. I think that the decision didn't go far enough. I think that by treating the COVID-19 vaccine differently from how we treat vaccines for measles, mumps, rubella, polio, and so on, I think that when we treat this vaccine differently, we're politicizing it. We should be mandating the vaccine for everyone for whom basically for everyone who is eligible to get the vaccine. That is how we beat polio. People don't look. You have to take a historical perspective here. There were people who died of polio. There are people who spent the rest of their lives in an iron lung. There's actually still a guy today who is in an iron lung because he caught polio as a child, right? And so this virus is killing folks. I mean, we're up to almost, I believe, 700,000 people nationwide, over 50,000 now in the state of Florida. And if we don't treat this vaccine like it's deadly, if we don't treat COVID-19 like it's deadly, then we, are effectively saying we're okay with people dying.
There's a lot of people that would agree with you. We have people that want to wait and see. I agree with you in terms of making sure that all who are eligible are encouraged and educated as to why, as you're saying, there has been a history of, if you're in public schools, you took vaccines. If you ever went to a public school, you could have gone without a vaccine. So yeah, there is a lot of misinformation, particularly targeted at communities of color, in order to create this sense of, and I was just listening to, and I listen to a lot of talk radio during the day, another piece that I forget who, oh my gosh, who published it, but it was basically saying that the anti-vax community is much smaller than it appears, but they have figured out Facebook's algorithm and understand what can be amplified and what the algorithm targets for, resharing.
They're loud.
Yes. So they're loud, and it seems like it's all these people, but it's not. They have figured out Facebook's algorithm. So it was very interesting. I was like, people don't know this because you think it's more people than it isn't. Mm-hmm. All right, no vaccine as of yet, says Jackie Soldier Nurse, for children under 12. Yes, they're talking about authorization in a few weeks. Yes, I think by the end of October, they want to say. It might be a little bit later, but yeah, we're getting there. We're hopefully going to be able to move in that direction. We're gonna stay out of the weeds a little bit. Art, thank you for your question. Are there reliable data that supports the effectiveness of a mask mandate, or is it to provide the illusion of safety? I think, and I'm gonna leave you to go to the CDC because there's a lot more information about it than we can provide here. But yes, they say that it's you protecting others around your aerosols are not going into the air as at a high enough rate to, possibly infect someone. So there is information. I'm going to say, go ahead. We're going to leave it there. I'll bring a medical professional and tackle some of that. All right. So we're going to go to reparations, I think, in this context, and then we'll move on to the economy. In this context, reparations has been talked about for a while. And I think especially since George Floyd's and people have been talking about it from way before George Floyd, don't get me wrong, but especially since the racial reckoning, if you will, that has been taking place since 2020 after the horrific, just inhumane death of George Floyd, there's been a lot more visibility around the argument for paying or in some way, and I'll ask you what you think might be the best way to implement some kind of which I say redress for for the harms of slavery, those who are descendants of slaves in America, not having the same access to education, homes, access to college, the list goes on. And it's, again, not just parity, looking at in society, oh, why do all Black folks or most of Black folks tend to have less of this, less of that, etc.
Right.
There is a through line, a historical through line as to why, guys.
Yes.
So let me ask you, where do you stand on reparations? And if you are in agreement with them, in what form would you suggest they take?
Yeah, so I really wish that we could provide targeted economic relief to people of color, whether or not you were descendants of American slavery. If you're a person of color, your ancestors were very likely enslaved, right? That's true if you are a Jamaican American immigrant, Haitian American, immigrant. If you're here, you were here because someone kidnapped your ancestors, brought you here, and enslaved them. And we bear the consequences of not just that, but of the fact that after slavery ended, we had 100 years of legalized terrorism against people of color, of systemic lack of access to the ballot. And also we were locked out of the most important social programs that this country ever conceived of in the New Deal, which got us out of the Great Depression, right? And so I wish that we could provide targeted relief directly to people of color, but the Supreme Court has interpreted certain things meant to resolve racial issues and disparities. They've interpreted that as a violation of the Civil Rights Act, because helping Black people involves helping them because they're Black. And treating people differently on the basis of their race is racism, according to the Supreme Court. There was a very interesting Supreme Court case where a school district was trying to desegregate their schools. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's racism, which is absolutely insane, right? So you have to find a way to help Black people without devising the program specifically to help Black people, right? And so here is the good thing. There's a way to do that. Right? People of color, because of all the historic disenfranchisement and racism, we tend to be overrepresented among folks who are living in poverty and in working class folks who are barely getting by. So if you have an agenda that is meant to help poor and working class people, to uplift and empower them, then you have an agenda that's pro-Black. And you have an agenda that will therefore correct for the historic injustices that have been done to our people. And so that's what I think is really important. There's a very interesting idea that Cory Booker has put forward. It's called baby bonds, which is basically the idea that when a person is born, you basically give that person a bond that matures over time. When they turn 18, they basically have the ability to cash that in. It's something that is expensive, but it's not something that we can't pay for. It's a matter of whether or not we want to prioritize closing the wealth gap between people of color and white folks. Another idea that I think is very important, and behind me on this bookshelf, there's a book called The Color of Law. I suggest everyone read this book cover to cover. It's called The Color of Law. And it talks about how segregation in neighborhoods was not just a result of people choosing to live with folks who look like them. No. It was a result of laws and government policy that purposely segregated communities from one another, people of color from white folks, and that depressed the value of homes and property in Black neighborhoods through a practice called redlining. And I think one way to direct aid to communities of color is to devise policies meant to invest in communities, historical communities that had been redlined, because by doing that, you are investing in Black communities and you are giving folks a leg up, right? And so I think through ideas like baby bonds, through ideas like investing in communities that have been redlined, and through stuff that is just general common sense stuff for working class folks, and most of us are working class, strengthening the power of unions and giving workers more power, providing for a basic cash benefit for everyone, because there are lots of folks who for various reasons might not qualify for government assistance because they might have money on paper.
Just a little bit too much. Yep.
Right. And I'm thinking about recent college graduates who, they might have gotten that good job. They might be making $70,000, $80,000 a year, but they have $100,000 in student debt. Those folks disproportionately look like us, and that's keeping us behind, right? So we got the degree that they told us we needed to get.
And then when that loan payment come, you like, wait a minute, they're going to take all my money each month. Trust me, it's not easy.
Exactly. So I think, we talk about reparations because the way that the courts interpret policies meant to help people of color. I think this Supreme Court will end up striking down affirmative action. I think that's just a matter of time, unfortunately. But we have to find a way to help poor and working class people broadly. And doing that, if we do it well, we will help and uplift people of color.
Understood. Thank you. Yes, as I think about this Supreme Court, it's giving me nightmares.
Right.
Do you believe that we should try to add more seats to the Supreme Court?
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer.
Okay.
I just want people to realize how important this is. First of all, you have two Supreme Court justices who were appointed by Trump, who are sitting in seats that were stolen first from the Obama administration and second from the Joe Biden administration. Antonin Scalia's seat became vacant during the Obama administration. Mitch McConnell, Republican who controlled the Senate, said we shouldn't fill this seat in an election year. We should let the presidential election play out and let the winner of that election pick the successor. So he stole that seat from President Obama, and Trump appointed that seat. Let's fast forward here. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg died weeks away from an election, Mitch McConnell said the exact opposite, that no, it's time to fill this seat immediately. And so that seat was stolen from President Joe Biden. So we have two people sitting in stolen seats. It has diminished confidence in the Supreme Court, and we need to correct for that by expanding the Supreme Court. But here's the more important issue. We got folks in Congress saying that we need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, right? Well, why are we talking about that? Because we know that the Supreme Court has gutted the original Voting Rights Act. We had a Voting Rights Act, folks. It was passed in 1965. The reason why we're talking about passing another one is because the Supreme Court has gutted and hollowed out the promise of that piece of legislation. So let me ask you, what makes you think that a Supreme Court that has already gutted the original Voting Rights Act is going to allow Congress to pass a new one with much of the material from the old one, and that it's not also going to strike down much of that one? The only way out, the only way to really protect our voting rights and also women's reproductive rights is to expand the Supreme Court, because this court is stacked with conservative ideologues who they say they care about the law and about the text and about strictly construing the meaning of the text. That's not what they care about. They have an outcome-based philosophy, and they're prepared to strike down anything that violates their political sensibilities.
Yeah, it's you've given a wonderful treatise on what is happening when it comes to why elections matter. Not only local presidential elections matter when it comes to appointing, but even when you do elect an Obama, you have people that are blocking his very right to appoint, at the time, Merrick Garland. Thank God we have him as Attorney General, but still it's shocking that for a whole generation now, we have 6 conservatives and 3 more liberal, you say neutral, justices. Like, I don't know. Excuse me, 5-4. Did I say 6-3?
No, it's 6-3. It's 6-3.
Okay, you was counting, carried a 1. I didn't know.
Well, it's 6-3, and Justice Breyer, who is one of the 3 liberal justices, very sharp guy, he's 83 years old. He needs to retire. Look at what Anthony Kennedy did. While Trump was in office, the Republican Supreme Court justice retired so that a Republican can replace him. I love Thurgood Marshall. He retired too early. He retired under President H.W. Bush. He had years left. We have to. Republicans
he was tired, though. He was probably
done. Yeah, he was tired. He was tired. But look, so here's the thing.
But point taken.
Yeah, the Republicans care a great deal about the court because they understand its power, and they have politicized the court. And here we are, coming to this fight with our noble principles, saying that we should not politicize the court. We should not push these old justices off, like Justice Breyer off of the bench. He needs to be able to retire on his own terms. Meanwhile, the Republicans are stacking the court with justices who are attacking our voting rights. And we're taking our noble principles to a gunfight. And we're wondering why we're losing.
Why do Democrats do that? I find that so annoying. When we look at it, like, you have to deal, with the realities of what, the rules of engagement are. And what our Republican friends have understood is that even if they don't have the majority vote, if you control the courts,
correct,
you're good as gold. You don't need your people to come out and vote in the majority, because we'll have the court overturn anything that they try to pass.
Correct.
It's a very sticky situation that I don't know if we have the political will to address the way it needs to be addressed, because we want to, exactly what you're saying, seem, above the fray. Give me a break. We're literally now putting back in the balance women's right to choose what to do with their bodies.
Right.
And that's a good segue to ask you, what do you think about this? We have the Texas abortion law
Mm-hmm.
that just went into effect. I
Mm-hmm.
think is about to be challenged, but it deputizes citizens. Basically, you
Right.
can tattletale on someone or bring a lawsuit against someone based
Right.
on your knowledge of them seeking an
Right.
abortion after how many weeks? It's
6.
6 weeks.
And it's really
6
not tied to a number of weeks. It's tied to the presence of a quote unquote fetal heartbeat. There's a
Mm.
dispute as to whether there even is such a thing as a fetal. It's really a
When you
pulse of
can sense
electrical
the heartbeat of
signals.
yeah.
Right. Right.
So,
But
and
it ends
now
up
we have
being a
a
reality.
state legislature in a legislator in I think from Central Florida,
That particular
African
legislator,
American
I have a
Republican.
background. I have a
Go ahead, give
background
us some
with
story
that
because
gentleman.
I'm still
Okay.
like, if they're bringing this here, it's gonna.
So Representative Barnaby filed this bill to basically put the Texas law in effect in Florida to legalize snitching on women who not only legalize but financially reward snitching on women who have received abortion care after 6 weeks. Right. So Webster Barnaby is black, and we had an issue last session when they brought House Bill 1, the anti-protest law, to the floor of the House. We were all preparing to give our speeches on it. And me, I had 2 nicknames. I never had a nickname before going to the Florida House. My first nickname that they gave me was the professor, because I always showed up super informed about a topic, but that's kind of how I am. And then when they gave out class superlatives, they gave me the nickname most likely to have read up on that, because I like to do my research, right? So I'm on the floor. Yeah, I'm polishing up my speech, and I'm printing out materials so that I can take it back to the floor and prepare for my speech. And there was a lady, a representative, in what we call the bubble, which is a side room off the floor of the House. And I'm in there, I'm making my copies, I'm printing stuff out. And she's on the phone just jabbering away. And I guess because I had my back to her at the copy machine, I was talking almost like I wasn't even there. And so she says, we have our token black Republican who's going to speak on the bill, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, yep, I got to go because I'm about to make my speech. And I'm in there like, did she really say that while I'm in this room? And so then I come out, and I wasn't going to say anything about it, but then I heard what Representative Barnaby said in his speech. And when he got up to speak, all the Republicans started crowding around him and taking out their phones and videoing it. And he basically looked at the back, because they seat all the Democrats on the on the back row, and a lot of us are people of color. And he looked at the back row and he said, "You all need to put this. You need to use more of your intelligence," he said, "and put this racism thing behind you. A black man talking to other black people, telling us that we're dumb for caring about racism." So then I put 2 and 2 together with what that representative said in the bubble when I was in there printing out my materials and getting ready, and what he actually said on the floor of the Florida House. And I had me a nice speech laid out. And I was ready to go. But when I got up to speak, I said, look, let me tell y'all what I heard in the bubble. Because you guys are saying that this is not a cynical attack on our rights. You guys are saying that there's not anything about race or racism in here that I don't understand. They say, why you guys are talking about racism in this bill? This is about riots. No. You guys are the ones engaging in cynical politics by having, as one of your members said, your quote unquote token black Republican to come speak on this bill. And I put it out there on the floor of the Florida House, and the Republicans hated me for that. The next day, my bills got canceled. They were
retaliation. Listen, this really happens, guys. This is politics, guys.
There was literal video of this.
Look, roll up those sleeves. This is real.
Right. Wow. There were audible gasps in the chamber. But here's the problem: the mores of the Florida House, the mores of that institution are not serving the people of Florida well. There's this belief that you can go to Tallahassee in the legislature, and that you can have folks there who are attacking our voting rights, attacking our right to protest, attacking a woman's right to choose, defunding our public schools, empowering the police to brutalize our bodies, engaging in policies that double down on the myth of the welfare queen and stigmatizing poor people and stigmatizing Black women. There are the mores of that institution in the Florida House say that when people doing that's just a part of the game, and that when you're done, you go out to the governor's club and you have drinks together and yada, yada. That's not how I operate. I don't have friends who are trying to disenfranchise my constituents. And if you are talking that way about really critical piece of legislation, I'm going to tell it. And, if that offends your sensibilities, and if you feel that has no place in the Florida House for me to have made that comment on the floor, then that's just too bad, because there are much worse things, substantively speaking, that are being done to people and that are being, basically pushed forward through that floor. And that's the real issue, not how we talk about each other on the floor of the Florida House. And that wasn't disrespectful, by the way. I was simply relating what was said. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think, and I have a hot chocolate here. Oh my gosh, what? Yes, we have an anti-riot bill that was passed here in Florida. Our governor signed it. That basically makes it illegal to, go into the road. You can't protest on a major highway. You can get arrested. This is our free speech we're talking about, our First Amendment rights we're talking about that have been curbed. Go ahead, Representative.
Look, there are many problems with the bill, but the real problem with the bill is that it defines it makes a riot illegal, of course, and it provides enhanced penalties and punishments for people who are engaged in a riot. But it defines a riot in such a way that someone who is peacefully protesting can be held responsible for the bad behavior of a handful of people at this peaceful protest. And that was why Judge Walker struck that part of the law down, because it's a clear and blatant attack, not just on the Black Lives Matter movement, but on the First Amendment rights of all Floridians. If white, Black, whatever, you should be concerned.
As we saw with our Cuban brothers and sisters when they were trying to show solidarity for folks on the island after, there were protests on the island of Cuba. They were in the middle of the highway. No one got arrested. They were in the middle of like 826, the major corridor and thoroughfare to the airport. Yeah. And no one got arrested. No, but then you have Black protesters who are literally, being pepper sprayed to death and gas and other things. And we have had issues with how it's being applied. So I'm sure that's going to come to the fore even more. Sakpase holds this and he's like, I can't believe it. Yes, welcome to Florida. We have a legislature and again, it goes back to why it's important to just be involved. Redistricting, drawing up the maps in terms of who can get elected in each district. Is done by your state legislature. Your legislatures here in the South are predominantly Republican. So they're drawing maps even after the census we just had. 2020, we had a census year. So based on how the population has grown, moved, etc., there are map making committees that will now make the maps for who gets elected and what seats cover what neighborhoods. And they keep drawing them so that our legislature, even though we have more registered Democrats in Florida, the legislature, the Florida House and the Florida Senate is majority Republican because they're drawing the rule. Let me tell you, my Republican friends know the rule book. They're like, you know what? We can figure out how we can be the majority, get the governorship, and make this a conservative state when the majority of its residents most likely are leaning Democrat, if not independent. So, and we're suffering the consequences of their laws as a result.
And look, I would be remiss if I did not talk with you about how sometimes legislators who are Black are very happy to help the Republicans gerrymander districts that entrench Republican power because they get something out of the process. This district that I'm running
don't call no names, Mr. Hardy.
I'm not going to call no names. No. So Florida's.
It's a serious issue, though. Wow.
Yeah. People are saying, well, why are so many people running in this congressional race? Well, the bigger question is, why is every working class person of color in two counties
in the same district,
single congressional
district? Yes,
right, exactly. Because they know people of color vote Democratic, and so if you can pack as many people of color as you can into as few congressional districts as possible, you create an opportunity for you to draw more Republican districts than would otherwise exist, and that happens every 10 years.
Ooh. Yeah. You got me going. We have a few more minutes. I know you have other things that you got to do. Let's talk a little bit more about economic issues. Yeah. As I stated before, in this district, we have 17% unemployment. What can you do if elected to address the joblessness, unemployment. I mean, like people were very.
I'm going to let you ask that question while I
Yes.
plug in my laptop, which is about
Okay,
to.
do it. I'll go me solo. Wait 1 second. Let me go to me solo. You guys, we've had a fantastic time talking to Omari Hardy. I'm so excited. He is definitely a passionate public servant. He is a very knowledgeable public servant. Just hearing about all the different things he's seen in Tallahassee. I'm going to ask him about the economy. I'm going to ask him about climate change. If you have any questions, drop them now because we're running out of time. He has another appointment. But I want to address certain things. Are you back, sir?
Yep.
Plugging in that laptop, making sure we don't
Thank you.
lose you all together. I'm grateful again. Thank you for the time for joining us. I'm really excited. He's like he has the knowledge. Drop that woosah. Yes, I know. He has so much knowledge from having served in Tallahassee, now trying to go to DC to serve in Congress. So let's talk about jobs, sir. What is your plan, if elected, to help address some of the unemployment that this district faces?
Yeah, so we spoke earlier about the New Deal and about how Black folks were systematically discriminated in the New Deal, right? The New Deal created the Federal Housing Administration, which allowed many Americans for the first time to buy a home by guaranteeing their mortgages. The New Deal created an agency called the Works Progress Administration, which basically did infrastructure projects and created jobs for people during the Great Depression that they never would have had. The whole point of the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, was to put people to work, but it was only for basically white men. And they couldn't, basically, Black folks were not able to get jobs through the Works Progress Administration, right? Well, today we have a crisis that is as serious as the Great Depression. It's called climate change. And it's a crisis not just for Americans, it's a crisis for all of humanity. And I believe that we should not let this crisis go to waste. In addressing climate change and restructuring our economy so that we are emitting fewer greenhouse gases that are causing the planet to warm and all these storms and droughts and wildfires and all this stuff. As we do that, we can create jobs and we can find a way to direct these jobs to communities where people live that have been historically disenfranchised, undermined, and sabotaged by American government policy. And that's what the Green New Deal is about. The Green New Deal is about addressing climate change while providing a just transition, a fair transition for those workers who are working in industries that are causing climate change, if you're working in the oil industry and so on, and also creating jobs for people in frontline communities like Florida District 20, so that we can correct for the historic injustices of the original New Deal, right? And so for me, passing the Green New Deal is paramount because it is a stone that kills two birds, so to speak, right? And so one of the things that I like about the Green New Deal is that there's this thing called a civilian climate corps. And basically it's a jobs program. It's a federal jobs program that says we need to build infrastructure to address all these different issues that are being caused by climate change. And in order to do that, we need to create a core of people all around the country, in particular from frontline communities, and make sure that we give them the jobs as we're doing this infrastructure work and as we're training people to work in a new green economy, right? And so that to me is very important. And obviously that's something that folks in our community can benefit from. I don't believe in trickle-down economics. I don't believe in this idea that if you give tax breaks to wealthy folks, or that if you find a way to incentivize rich people to create jobs, that they'll do so in a way that's fair. I just think that if folks need jobs, then the government should step up and create those jobs itself, just as we did during the New Deal, which reshaped society and changed the expectations that working class people have for their government for an entire generation. And that's what I think we need more of, but this time it needs to be inclusive.
I love it. You're getting some love here. Yes, I agree. Wise young man. Omari Hardy, hold on. Change is coming. I hear you. We are running out of time, sir. I keep saying that. I love it. I see people watching. Thank you. Drop your last questions, please, now, sir. I want to go to any final issues that you think are affecting Congressional District 20 that you want to address. We've talked education. We've talked reparations. Maybe gun violence, because I know there are a lot of impoverished parts of this district where their people are dying. Can you talk about what you can do if elected to help address some of the senseless. I was going to say inner city, but it's not just because you got Parkland in your district, and that's not inner city, and that's where the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting took place. So what can we do to address gun violence if you join the Congress?
Thank you for asking about gun violence. It's a multifaceted problem. There's the gun violence like Parkland and Pulse, these mass shootings, and the solutions to stop stuff like that are not necessarily solutions that will stop the gun violence that unfolds in African American communities in Florida District 20 and across the country, right? So yes, we need to ban assault weapons. We need to ban so-called high-capacity magazines. These clips that hold many bullets that allow you, to fire 50 shots without having to reload. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. We need universal background checks and so on. But also, look, my background is in economics. And I will say that Chris Rock is a very good economist. Chris Rock has a stand-up skit where he says, bullets should be $5,000. He said if bullets were $5,000, there would be no innocent bystanders. People would have to open up a 401k savings account to commit murder. And the fact of the matter is, it's kind of funny, that basically, what he was saying was funny, but it's also good economics. If you want less of something, you tax it. That's why we tax cigarettes, to make them more expensive so that people buy less of them. That's why we tax alcohol.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we need a very, very hefty tax on guns and ammunition, because there's the cost of the gun, but then to the owner who goes to the store and buys it, but then there's the societal cost of having one more gun out on the street. And we need to make the cost of owning a gun more closely match the societal cost. And you do that by levying a tax. It's called the Pigovian tax, after Pigot, who devised these type of taxes. The other thing is, in our communities, we need to treat gun violence like a public health issue. When you see one gun violence event happen, what do we see happen in our communities? The violence multiplies, because someone gets shot and killed. The next thing you know,
retaliation
and so what they funded a program in Chicago, and it was working until they unfunded it, where basically they gave jobs to people who were on the streets, who lived that life, who have credibility with folks in the community. And when violence occurred, they stepped in. We all know who's involved in this stuff. They figure out who's involved in this stuff, and they mediate to stop the shootings from multiplying. This model is called violence interruption. Look it up. It's extremely effective. You just need to fund it, and you need to make sure that it's implemented at a local level. So that's my kind of stance on gun violence. We need solutions tailored to our community, and we also just need to raise the cost of gun ownership. Before we go, I just want to say one thing, and I think is very critical for Black folk. There are lots of politicians whose racial politics are very woke, but whose class politics are dead sleep. And I just want to say that the fight to empower Black people is not a fight to assimilate a handful of Black elites into the very same power structures that are leaving working class people of all colors behind. I'm happy Oprah's got some money. I'm happy that Jay-Z's got some money. But the fight to empower Black people is not to create Oprahs and Jay-Z's, right? It's not to blackwash capitalism. It's to uplift the masses of marginalized people who are being exploited by large corporations, who are being paid poverty wages, who don't have good health care, who are finding it difficult to come together and organize and form a union. That is how we empower Black people. And so as we go forward, not just in this election, but in future elections, we need to elect leaders who understand that even within this racial dynamic, there's a class dynamic. And we need to elect folks who are focused on uplifting the underclasses in this country and empowering them at a broad-based level.
Wow. I see why they call you the voice of the people, and a fighter for the marginalized. I think that what you just said is a whole discussion in and of itself, because there's a lot of layers to, what makes sense economically for such a diverse racial group, and where people think, the solution may not actually serve, as you're saying, the most members of that racial group. So I listen, you got some knowledge. I understand why they say, the class is in session when we speak to Mr. Omari Hardy. Give your closing statement. He would say, K business. Heck yeah, I'll say. I remember this guy. I follow him on Instagram. And I think he meant Omari wasn't playing with his peers during the council meeting. I totally respect this guy. Oh, okay, he corrected himself. I meant Omari. Okay, so you got folks who can vouch for. I guess you are progressive. You definitely sound like you are not, just dancing with what has been mainstream democratic values. You see yourself as pushing the envelope. I'm putting words in your mouth. But make your final statement, sir. Well, it has been a pleasure. But go ahead.
Progressive. I didn't feel I had anything more to say until you said that, because I look, I grew up in a very mainstream Democratic household, right? We voted Democrat every election. And, my mom's a history teacher. So I of course read and knew my history, but progressivism for me wasn't a thing until I got in office and served with people who had opportunities to do good things for working class people, but made excuses for not going all the way. And that was frustrating, because there was an approach that said it's okay to stop short. And that, yes, I know government's about compromise, but you don't start with a negotiation by first negotiating with yourself. That's not how you advocate for poor and working class people. You have to go for the most. And through the process, there will be compromise, but you can't start with a compromise. You start with what your ask is, and I'm not asking for anything less than what working class people deserve, and anything less than what's possible. We can do these things, right? Yeah. And the key thing here is, this is a district that Joe Biden won by 28 points. This is not a swing district. We don't need to worry about, we need somebody who can talk to Republicans so we can keep this district. No, this is our district. And so as we go to the polls on November 2nd, I believe that we should elect someone who's really going to push for working class folks. And that's what I have done at the local level and at the state level. And if I'm fortunate enough, I would hope to be able to do it for folks in the community I grew up in the United States Congress. So thank you for having me.
I love it, Days. That's a whole word. Thank you, Jackie. Empower underclass at a broad-based level. And Gay Business says he's not a talker. We need him in Baltimore. Be more in the building. We're watching from all over the country. You guys have been awesome. Thank you for hanging in there. This is Let's Talk Justice. You guys vote, especially those watching in South Florida. If you can, please like, subscribe, share, so more people get his message. We want people to first understand how important the special election is. Like I said, we're one person down in the Congress right now. So there are no voices right now for the 700,000 plus people that live in Florida Congressional 20. So we are excited. This is going to be a huge election. Really, it's going to be decided in November, even though you got to come back and vote in January as well for the Republican versus the Democrat. But this is the primary, where you have to be registered, either Republican or Democrat, to vote among the Democrats. And again, there are 17 people in this race. So you guys have a choice to make. I'm sure he has made the case for several of you. And again, if you need more information, where can they find you, or where can they get in contact with you?
OmariHardy.com. You can go to OmariHardy.com. And you can learn more about my background. You can learn more about my platform, my issues there. And also, look, we have a tab up there called Accomplishments. Check that out. We put it up there in black and white, the things that we've been able to get done in very difficult environments for working class folks. So.
All right. I just dropped it in the chat, OmariHardy.com. Mr. Omari Hardy, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for this wonderful so enlightening discussion. I wish you the very best. Thank you for being a wonderful representation of the next generation and what we are capable of. Keep up the great work. No matter what happens in the outcome, we are cheering for you, and we know you will continue on a successful path. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Again, like, comment, share. Please get the message out, and we are going to be cheering for this brother no matter what happens. Thank you. Everybody say thank you. Okay, bye. Have a beautiful day. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Let's Talk Justice. Take care, guys. Bye now.